just tuning in, we're still setting up. We still got a few more minutes before the show, and we'll get started. Aloha. Thanks for joining us. We'll be live in probably about 7 minutes. Hang with us.
Okay. Aloha mai kako. Aloha. Welcome to Hawaii Volcanoes National Park's After Dark in the Park program. I know there's a light crowd in the audience, but we've got quite a few folks watching us on the live stream. So appreciate everybody coming out tonight, especially for tonight's program. All of you are probably interested in what it takes to get a federal job. And the reality is it's folks like you that end up with the federal jobs because you've taken time to come to something like this and do your research on how to do that. So that puts you ahead of the other crowd that's not that interested in learning all about it. So what can I tell you about our speaker tonight? Benjamin Hayes in 2017 was considering taking a job at Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. In January of 2018, he came to us from Skagway, Alaska. Some of you are smiling already. You know 2018, right? So he gets here. We're busy for 5 months. Then there's a 6.9 earthquake. Then there's over 500 earthquakes. Then lava pours out. The park closes. There's a tropical storm, a sharknado. No, I'm kidding. I made up the last one. But it was just one big challenge after the next. The park closed until September of that year. And then that's been followed by a number of challenging things. So if there's anybody that's undaunted by challenges, it's Benjamin Hayes. Ben has got a great background in history, but he's also worked long enough with the government that he knows how you dot the I's and cross the T's. And it can be really intimidating to navigate all of that. Ben's going to show you how. He's going to take you through the steps. So if you're interested in getting a federal job, there's a series of things you can do to make it far, far easier. And that's what he's going to share with you tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Benjamin Hayes.
Aloha, Dean. Aloha, ahi ahi mai kako. Welcome and thank you for coming to this evening. We can get the lights up and I will start this slideshow. And you all have joined us a day after our main projector conked out, so we're using this backup here. So that's why the graphics are a little further away than normal. Take this out. But again, it's a pleasure to have you here and to provide some guidance and information on how to apply for federal jobs, hopefully in a way that will be successful for you. And so just I want to ask a question. Who has applied for a federal job before? You can raise your hand. So we got a couple. And does anyone know some rumors or myths you may have heard about applying for a federal job? Here's one that I've heard. There's an algorithm when you send in your application. Has anyone ever heard that? The computer sorts it? Any other myths or rumors you may have heard about applying for a federal job?
They're looking for keywords in your resume?
They're looking for keywords in your resume. Yeah, that's one I've heard too. And there's a kernel of truth to that. We'll get to that. But for the most part, maybe not. They are looking for words, but not like searching like a word search. But we'll talk about how human resource specialists look at your resume. Okay, but before we get into it, I just want to make a quick disclaimer. The presentation I'm giving tonight is intended for basic information and orientation only. I'm not a human resource specialist. And nothing presented here is policy, but tips and helpful hints is what I'm seeking to provide you with today. And what we're going to discuss today, one, how do we get here? So the federal hiring process is notoriously complicated. How did that happen? Why is it the way it is? An overview about the process itself, the main steps, how to create your USA Jobs account. You have to have an account on USA Jobs to apply for a federal job. Resume tips on what you will want to do to make your resume more competitive for that job you're seeking. And then what to look for in job announcements. Those words that you mentioned are all in the job announcement, waiting for you to use in your resume. So you can amp your resume up by looking for those keywords. In addition, there are 2 tests you may be required to take. One is a self-assessment, and one could be a knowledge test, harking back to The days where there used to be a civil service examination for the federal government, that is kind of coming back into play, especially in the last 2 years. More and more jobs require a test, a skills test, as part of your application. And we'll look at some of those questions. What to expect after you apply, some interview and reference tips, and then I'm going to share some jobs that are opening here at Hawaii Volcanoes National Park in the next couple months, so you can be on the lookout for those jobs. And then it's time for Q&A. So a little bit about myself. I was once in your position, seeking a job or employment with the federal government. I started my federal career when I was in grad school in Tennessee, and that is really what led me to try to seek a full-time permanent federal career, getting a temporary internship at Stones River National Battlefield. And that's me in the second from the right in this photo, 15 years ago. And I probably have applied for over 200 jobs since then, since 15 years ago for the federal government. So I failed most of the time, but the key is to keep applying and developing your skills and your interview skills, and don't give up, continue applying for jobs. So, a short history of federal hiring. The United States of America began with an infinitesimally small workforce, but that dramatically changed during the Civil War when the federal government was transformed into a major employer in the United States. And there were drawbacks to this. Employment for the federal government in the 19th century was defined by the spoiled system, which means that presidents and executive branch officials could give away jobs to their supporters. And then when the president or other officers left their office, those employees were often fired. So as a consequence of the spoils system, federal hiring was fraught with corruption, and employees could be hired or fired at any time. And a lot of times the folks that were hired did not have the skills to do the job. So there was also not very good services for the American people as a consequence of this corrupt system. Well, that all changed or began to change on July 2nd, 1881. President Garfield was shot by Charles Guiteau, a disgruntled office seeker who felt entitled to a job because he had supported Garfield for president. And when he did not get a job, he shot him. And so that led to, 2 years later, the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act of 1883. Why is this important? Why do you need to know this? Because this established that the selection of federal government employees will be by merit and fair competition rather than ties to political candidates or political party affiliation. It also made it illegal to fire or demote federal employees for political reasons. So this was a sea change. This was the beginning of the professional and politically neutral federal workforce over 100 years ago. But the last major legislation for the federal employees was 44 years ago in 1978. So it's maybe time for some reform. The current system. Laws are passed by Congress on the federal workforce. The laws are interpreted by the Office of Personnel Management. That is the HR office for the federal government, the OPM, Office of Personnel Management. So they interpret the laws and make rules for all of the departments, from Department of Defense to Department of Commerce to us, Department of Interior, to follow. Then the Department of Interior, which employs over 70,000 people, make their own hiring policies based on those regulations. Then the National Park Service, which is an agency under the Department of the Interior, with about 20,000 employees, we make our own policies or rules based on, it's just a network of rules, a layer cake of rules, with the OPM being, or the Congress setting the foundation, and then each agency building on that. And so we hire according to the policies brought down through all those federal agencies. The main point is that the law is paramount, and everything is interpreting that law in different ways. So why is it important to know? Federal hiring is driven by process. The intent of all of these rules and procedures I'm about to share with you is fairness in hiring. That is why they're there. You could try to hire someone, but if you make a mistake in the process, you may have to go back and start over again. Even if you've already selected a candidate, this is not uncommon, because getting the process right is more important on occasion than getting someone hired right away. We have to follow the rules. And as a consequence, these processes take time, and we all need to be patient. Even me as a hiring official, we got to be patient and follow the processes so we can hire the employee without any going backwards. So let's talk about the process. Let's say I need to fill a job. So I complete what's called a package, a series of forms that I fill out, and I turn in to the human resource office. And there's an HR specialist that takes those documents and converts it into an announcement that's posted on USA Jobs. Anyone been to USA Jobs before? Okay, cool. That's where almost all of the jobs go. And then candidates apply for the job online only. There's no faxing, there's no mailing. It's all through your USA Jobs account. And then HR specialists, once the job announcement closes, they look at all the applications and determine who is qualified. They may use another, either a self-assessment that you complete or a test or both to rank the applicants. And then they give the best applicants to me, the hiring official. So I may not actually see everyone who applied. I just may see the top 10 out of 100. Or if I'm hiring a lot of positions, I'm hiring, for example, I used to work at the National Mall in DC, and we would typically hire 20, 30 summer seasonals, and I may get 500 applications to look at because I'm hiring a lot of people. It depends on the job. And then I go through and make my selection. I rate and rank the candidates, I interview, I check references, and then I turn in who I want to select to the hiring official, and then they send the job offer out to the applicant. So let's take a look at the first step, USA Jobs. So this is, again, the nexus of where you will find jobs and apply for them and create your application. Step 1 is to go to USA Jobs. And step 2 is to create a login.gov account with your email and cell phone. Raise your hand if you've heard of login.gov. A couple folks. So this is new, as maybe in 2019. So this is a system for security of your information on USA Jobs. It is used not only USA Jobs, but other federal government applications out there. All this will do is when you're ready to sign in to your USA Jobs account, you create a USA login, or a login.gov account so that you can double authenticate your information. It'll text you. So you have to have your number and a login.gov account for your security. And then you can log into your USA Jobs account and be secure. That double authentication is making sure no one tries to log in and steal your info. Step 3, create your profile. A USA Jobs profile is just your basic info, your address, your phone, your email, and then there are 2 ways to create your resume in there. You can create it using the resume builder function in USA Jobs, which you can fill out, or you can load your own documents, your own resume. It's up to you which you want to use. There's not a preference for either of them. The advantage of using the resume builder on USA Jobs is it'll prompt you for the information you'll need to provide in order to compete for the job. So there's some advantage to using that, but there's you can use either. And then you can also upload other documents into your profile. It could be a transcript from college. It could be a certification for training you've taken. It could be veteran status, a DD-214, to demonstrate your veteran status. It could be other items, an award that you may have received that could help with your resume. So just raise your hand if you already have a resume you used before to apply for jobs, federal or otherwise. So most of you have. Great. The question I'm going to ask you is, who are you writing this for? And most people will say the person hiring. That's who you're writing for. But for federal jobs, you're writing for two people. The first is you're writing for the human resource specialist. That's the first person who will look at your resume in your application package, not me. It'll come way later. So this is the first person you need to be making sure that you're writing for. And then the second is the hiring official, the person who will actually make the decision. But if you don't get through the HR specialist, then I'll never see it. I'll never see your resume. So that's why it's really important. So these are tips on how to organize your resume to make it easy for not only the hiring official, but for the HR specialist to be able to quickly determine you have the skills, the knowledge, and the abilities to do the job, and they can send you on to me. The first tip is to use reverse chronological order from the top, starting with your most recent job or work experience, and then work backwards through time. You need to provide greater detail for experiences that are relevant to the job you're applying for. So if you are applying for an engineer job, but you have your job as a circus clown taking up 3 pages, it's not going to really help you get to that engineer skill set that the HR specialist is looking at. Does that make sense? So look and highlight what is important for the job you're applying for. And we'll look through a job announcement to show you. And make sure you show all experiences and accomplishments on the job as you earned it. That helps agencies determine you have that experience. And you can use bullet or paragraph form, either one. But the main thing is you want to make it easy for that HR specialist first. So use plain language, avoid acronyms and terms that are not easily understood. Use active voice. So Batman, I'm Batman, that's active voice. Yoda, I am, is passive voice. Don't be Yoda, be Batman. Start with an action verb when you're listing the information for each of the positions. So, and use numbers to highlight accomplishments. The HR specialists love numbers and action verbs. So I got a few examples. Improved efficiency of a document, wrote 25 news releases, managed a student organization budget, wrote a grant that brought in more than X amount of dollars. Can any of you think of an action verb from a job that you've done now or in the past that starts a sentence?
I care for a quadriplegic father.
Quick care for a quadriplegic father. Great. You're providing a skill set that helps your father. Anyone else? Dean here delivers interpretive programs to audience of average of 50 people per day. Okay, so that we'll talk more about action verbs. You need this. I can't overemphasize the importance of this next part. You must include date, hours, levels of experience, and in each of your work experience, a start date and an end date. The number of hours you worked per week. HR specialist will assume nothing. So if you wrote, I was a park ranger from 1978 to 1996, but you didn't include hours per week, they could throw out that job experience because you didn't include the hours per week. They didn't know if you're part-time or full-time. You must start date, end date, number of hours per week you work. That is the only way you will get credit from the HR specialist for the job you're applying for from your past experience. And I got an example here. So supervisor, park ranger, National Marlboro Parks. July 2014 to September 15, 40 hours per week. Again, can't overestimate how important that is. Include volunteer work, roles in your community, organizations. That's relevant, potentially very relevant, valuable work experience that you need to get credit for. So it's not just what you're paid to do, it's what you're not paid to do. A lot of people like me started with volunteering in order to get experience to compete for jobs. Does anyone volunteer for anything? Yeah, a lot of us do. So don't sell yourself short. Be your own advocate. And don't worry if it seems too long. Your resume will be much longer than for a federal government application. And be specific about what kind of levels of experience you have. So if that's a team leader or project manager or just a team member, make sure that's mentioned. And experiences and accomplishments that prove you can perform the task at the level required. So let's look at a couple examples of resume layouts. I pulled both of these from USA Jobs. So these are internal examples. So one here, and it's hard to see from a distance, so I'll just explain it. These are bullet points, and they all start with an action verb. Oversee 3 mentoring programs. Recruit, train, and manage 25 adult members. Develop marketing and training materials. Write and manage program grants. Communicate in Spanish with program participants. Researched, worked, utilized, wrote, drafted, supervised, contacted, assembled. Action verbs are really good at synthesizing the skills that you have for the jobs you've done. And let's look at the narrative format. Again, there's no right or wrong way. You can do bullet points or you can do narratives. But this still uses they still apply the action verbs. So formulated, budget, and then analyze, develop, produce, justify, develop, assemble, forecast, develop, coordinate, establish, assist, reprogram. All action, every sentence on this narrative resume starts with an action verb. And I really recommend that approach. But either way, writing a longer narrative or bullet points, it's the same tactic. Oh, and both of these have the start date, the end date, and the hours worked per week. Hours worked per week. Gotta have that. Cover letter. Get a lot of questions on cover letter. Cover letters are optional. They're not required as part of your federal application package, but they can show that you are willing to go the extra mile. And think of a cover letter as a single-page summary of why you should get the job. Also consider who the intended audience is. The HR specialists, they're not concerned about cover letters. They're concerned about your resume and your transcripts and their certifications. So they'll probably ignore the cover letter. The cover letter is speaking directly to the hiring official, to me. And so that is your intended audience. And so you can write to that person. I would recommend that you be specific about the job if writing a cover letter. And please avoid a generic cover letter for all multiple jobs that you're sending. That doesn't impress me on a personal level. What really impresses me and stands out is if you're writing specifically for the job you applied for and why you are the best candidate. And I always read them. And maybe 10% of applicants actually have a cover letter. So it's an advantage that you can have over other applicants. So let's look at, this is a recently announced job for the National Park Service. Let's take a look at, if I can find my cursor. There she is. Okay, so the first thing is that there's a key data here on the right. The opening closed dates. This just closed last week. Salary, the grade, and then everywhere this announcement is. So this is a combined announcement with many other national parks. And if you scroll down through all these parks. Oh, here we are. That's us. So we're included with all of these other parks because we're hiring. This is for a seasonal position. So all these parks are doing the same thing, and so they're consolidating work for, instead of announcing 50 positions one at a time, they're going to combine them all. And notice in the duties, they have almost written your resume for you. Develop and present, develop programs, provide informal interpretation, perform cashier duties, actively promote safety. This is where you go first. And try to find ways to connect the duties listed on the job announcement with your resume. So this is a big deal. Try to reflect those. Obviously, you need to be truthful and honest, but they're helping you out with this job announcement. It's looking for, this is what they're looking for. And so you can use that to your advantage. In addition, there are different duties for the different grade levels. So in federal government, there are the general service pay scale. So the lower, the less, the more entry level, and the higher you get, the more skills and experience are required. So for the GS 5, they require these duties, and then the GS 7, you get paid more. There are more things you have to are required to know and duties to perform. Then it has conditions of employment, qualifications. This is another thing to review carefully to make sure you have the qualifications that are required for the job. And normally, for GS5 or some kind of entry-level positions, you need to have either one, a degree, or a combination, or equivalent work experience, like working for 4 years, that's equal to a degree, or a combination between the two. But it explains that, and then it explains how you'll be evaluated, and these are the 3 categories. As I mentioned, all the applications will be looked at by a human being, HR specialists. They will determine if you are qualified, well qualified, or best qualified. And they use a couple of techniques to determine that, not just your resume. Your resume is most important, but they also look at your self-assessment, which we'll talk about, or a test, a skills test. And we'll talk about that. Not all jobs require them. But based on all those metrics and what your resume shows them, they will put you into one of these. Well, actually, there are 4 buckets. There's the not qualified, and you're just removed from consideration. But if you are qualified, you're in that bucket, and then so on. The hiring official will probably just get the best qualified candidates, and that's who they will choose from. And they won't necessarily get the rest. And another thing, I lost my cursor again. At the bottom is how to apply, and then there is a contact should you have questions. Now, because this is such a massive job announcement, it's a generic email. They do respond, they do answer this email, but for specific job announcements, for just like hire one person, it will normally be the HR specialist email. So it'll say Ben Hayes, Benjamin_Hayes at NPS.gov. And so you'll actually have the person to contact should you have any information, needs, or questions. So don't hesitate to reach out, but make sure you do it fast because these positions sometimes are only announced for a very short period of time. Always make sure you put in your application, even if you don't hear back. Sometimes these positions are limited for the number of applicants, and so they will cut off the announcement when they hit that limit. It could be 50 people, and then they'll pull the announcement down. And it could only be 48 hours after they posted it. It depends on the job. Okay, and let's go back to the slideshow. All right, so we looked at an announcement. Now let's talk about the assessment questionnaire. Has anyone ever filled out an assessment questionnaire before when you applied for a federal job? So this is your self-assessment. This is required for almost all jobs, and it is going to take you through a series of questions about the duties of the job. And you are ranking yourself. So it'll ask you, describe your experience performing X task. And you can say, A, I'm considered an expert at this task, and I have trained others to perform it. B, I perform this task routinely without supervision. C, I perform this task with supervision. D, I am trained to perform this task, but I have not yet done so on the job. Or E, I forgot E, I do not have training or experience performing this task. So this allows you to rate your own skills and abilities, usually in those 5 categories. And what's critical here is that you can, if you're a little too modest, you can remove yourself from consideration. Because if you don't rank high and score high enough on this self-assessment, you'll probably not make it to that top bucket of best qualified. So my advice, my guidance to you, be honest, but do not be modest. It will not help you. Please be your advocate in the self-assessment. There are people, a lot of people that have applied, that I've talked to, and they're, well, I'm a humble person. I don't like to brag, and I don't consider myself an expert, but I can tell them, like, you are an expert at this task. You have trained others to do it, and you should mark yourself as an expert and not feel an ounce of guilt, because this is the process that we have to exist in. So be your own advocate, be honest, make sure you can back up that claim in your resume that you're an expert or you're really good at the task, but don't be modest. So now let's talk about the increasing use of what's called the USA Hire Assessment. So this harkens back to a time when all federal employees were required to take what's called a civil service exam. It's kind of like an SAT for federal employment. Now that kind of went away decades ago, but now there's, especially over the last 2 years, they're bringing back these assessments. The intent is to test your knowledge at the time you're applying for the job. So it looks at actual skills, not just related to the job, but general skills. It looks at what would you do? Here's a situation. What would you do? And it gives you multiple choices. Read this paragraph. And then it determines if you can read with comprehension, is ask questions about it. It asks math questions. So what is interesting is that these tests are specific to the job. So not all of these questions of the test, not all of them all of them are related to the job in one way or another. But some of them are very specific, particularly for the skills like an engineer or something that would need to be technical. There are these 5 topics that you will be tested on if the job you're applying for requires a test. Math, the ability to do math, arithmetic, decimals, probability, fractions, and you can use a calculator. Judgment, the ability to positively respond to certain workplace situations and scenarios. So it's like situations that would occur at work, what would you do? Interaction, personality-based questions to determine how you would behave in certain work situations. Obviously, if you are an extrovert, then there are certain personality-based jobs that might be more appealing for you and also better for the government. And also, if you're an introvert, the same thing applies. It's trying to test that. Reasoning, ability to use logic and skills in certain situations, and then reading, ability to read and comprehend written text. So let's take a look at some sample questions. How about that? Over here. So here are some sample questions. Here's one for math. 3x minus 3 equals 6. Solve for x. Anyone know that one? 3x minus 3 is 6. Solve for x. It's 3. There it is. And here is an occupational judgment example. Barbara and Derek are our coworkers, Barbara has just been provided with a new assignment. The assignment requires the use of a specific computer program. Derek walks over to Barbara's cubicle to speak to her. If you were in Barbara's position, what would be the most and least effective course of action to take from the choices below? And it has, try to find other coworkers who can explain how to use the program. Tell your supervisor that you don't know how to use the program and ask him to assign someone who does. Use the program reference materials, tutorial program, and the help menu to learn how to use the new program on your own. Or explain the situation to your supervisor and ask him what to do. Kind of sexist. Anyway, that's an example. I don't have the right answer for that one. That's interesting, but it's trying to determine what your personality and those reasoning and interaction skills you already have. And then there's a reasoning. Here's an occupational reasoning example. All documents that contain sensitive information are considered to be classified. Mary has drafted a report that contains sensitive information. Based on the above statements, is the following conclusion true, false, or is there insufficient information to determine? The report drafted by Mary is considered to be classified. Is it true, false? Not enough info? Well, but the reasoning, I'm going to attempt to answer this. So, there's sensitive information. All sensitive information is considered to be classified. The report drafted by Mary is considered, I would call it true by that. It's just looking at the logic behind that. So I don't want to spend all time on these questions. But hopefully that gives you a sense of what you may be required to take based on the position you're applying for. What's important about these questions are that they won't be part of when you're applying. You'll be sent a link after you're done. So you go through the process, you do your self-assessment, you upload your resume and your documents, you click done, and then it will email you a link to take this test if it's required. You will have a time limit to take the test. Give yourself 2 to 3 hours. Uninterrupted time. I'm serious, it will take you that long. People have tried, I can do it in 10 minutes, blow through it. Don't do it. Please take your time. There are also online study guides and help, for pay or for free that you can look up to take a test. Another thing to keep in mind is this test you can only take once a year for the job. So let's say you want to apply to park ranger. Park ranger does require one of these tests. And you take it, and you just had a bad day, you bombed. Well, you're stuck with that score for a year. So anytime you want to apply for a new park ranger job, they're going to look back on that old score. And they don't tell you what you scored. They don't reveal that information. So study and be ready and have 2 to 3 hours of uninterrupted time to complete the test. Okay, so let's assume you go through your application, you apply, you do your self-assessment, maybe you're required to take a test, you take the test, now what? Well, you can always log back into your USA Jobs account and see the status. And they've been doing a better job of updating the status. So the HR specialist will go in and say, we are reviewing applications, it'll say, you can even say you were considered, but you were not forwarded to the selecting official. It can say that in your account before you get notified by email. It may take months to hear back, because all these processes take time, especially if a lot of people apply for the job, because they got to be all looked at, not only by the HR specialist, but potentially by the hiring official too. So you may get an availability check. Raise your hand if you ever got an availability check for a position. So the availability check, I do it very often because I know there's a significant amount of time passes between when the job is announced and when I get a list of candidates. And there is always people have gotten other jobs. People have moved on. People have decided they didn't want a job. And so I check and see who's left among the people that apply that I have that still wants the job. And so be ready for an availability check. It's very common for federal government, and they will send you an email. Are you still interested in this job? Please respond within 2 days and let me know. Please respond quickly to that. And then be ready for references to potentially be checked before you're asked to interview. Some people do it that way. I normally interview then reference check, but just be ready. So don't be surprised if you apply for a job and then out of the blue, your references are getting calls. That's a great thing, but be ready for that. So let's say you're asked after you get an availability check, you say, yes, I am still interested and I would love to talk to you about the job. So for interviews, how many of you had an interview that you didn't do so well in your past? I can raise my hand high. I had bombed some interviews in my time. Well, for me, it's because I didn't prepare for the interview. So please prepare in advance. Find out about the job. Go refresh and look at that job announcement. In your USA Jobs account, you can click on it. It's there. It says, I applied for this job. And you can click on that old announcement. Even though it's been pulled from USA Jobs, it's still live. You could go back to that link and look at it and refresh yourself. Think of possible questions you could be asked. Write down your answers to the questions in advance. Use specific experiences from your previous jobs and work in answering those questions. Refer to that. And then write down a couple questions that you want to ask the hiring official. That shows intellectual curiosity. I deeply respect that. It's almost a red flag when I say, do you have any questions for me? And they say, nope. Well, really? You want to work here for a career and you don't have any questions? Here's some frequently asked questions I recommend everyone have an answer for, regardless if you're applying or interviewing for a federal job or a private sector, state or local. Why are you the best person for this job? Why should I hire you? You have an answer for that. Always. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Have an answer for that. This is a question. What are your goals and how does this job fit into your goals? Why do you want to work here? And you can make that, you can answer that question in 2 ways. You can be, like, I want to work here because I love this place. That's great. That could be true. But you can also work in why you would be the best person for the job. I want to work here because I love this place, and I think I could bring a skill set to your team that you don't have. Advocate for yourself. Always with these questions. How do you respond to criticism and conflict? Now, that's a question I generally ask because we work with the public, and the public can be critical and have conflict. And so I want to know that for that reason, for folks that I'm working with. But it's also true for any feedback that we get at work. It could be critical, it could trigger conflict, and so it's a good question to be ready for. Describe your ability to work as part of a team. That's important for this team that works in this building, and then this park team in a broader sense. So that's an important skill, teamwork. Describe your communication style. Have an answer for that, and I hope it's collaborative, and you seek to listen and learn as well as share your feedback. It's a loop. That's what I'm saying. Describe your ability to prioritize multiple tasks with nearly simultaneous deadlines. Now, here in the Park Service, we have a lot of work. We have a lot of missions that we're charged to execute, but we don't always have the capacity and time to do them all fully. And so that's a question that all of us employed here at the park are often struggling with. Prioritize not enough capacity with more than enough tasks to complete. So what's your answer for that? How do you prioritize? How do you deal with multiple deadlines and determining which one to do and maybe which one not to do? Here's some more interview tips. Write down the questions as you're asked. You can refer to them and make sure you answer the question when you're being interviewed. Ask for a moment to consider your answer if you need. Don't try to just start word vomiting immediately when they ask the question. Consider your answer and maybe look at those notes you took. Ask questions to clarify. Ben, when you say conflict, who do you mean conflict with in your question? That's great. Ask clarifying questions. That really helps you provide a better answer. Use your notes. Remember you wrote down questions already and you wrote down answers? Well, interviews are almost always, 99.9% of the time, on the phone or over the computer screen. So you could have your notes looking at them as you respond. And that's great, that's fine. You can use those tools to your advantage in the interview. Make sure you answer the question. I can't tell you how many times I've conducted an interview and the candidate did not answer the questions. And I'm not going to go back and say, hey, you didn't answer this. I'm going to move on because I got a limited amount of time. Be succinct. All of these interviews are time limited. Even when I applied for this job, I had an hour to answer questions. And they said, Ben, we have an hour, we have 12 questions. So it's up to you to budget your time in answering them so we get through them all in an hour. And if we don't, well, that's on you. All we're doing is asking the questions, Ben. We're not clarifying things. And we're not giving you extra time. So, budget your time accordingly. Now let's talk about references. Pet peeve. Everyone, resumes say references available upon request. Of course I need your references. Please include them. Don't make me ask for them. And that's almost every other hiring official I've talked to have the same thought is that's just another step we have to take to seek your references. So go ahead and put them on. Make sure your references are dependable. Make sure their info is up to date. And make sure that they will return calls when asked. Because it is a red flag when I call a reference up and they're like, who? Oh, no, I don't, why are you hiring that guy? Like, that has actually happened before. Or you try to reach a reference and it's like they ghosted you. And they don't respond to emails or phone calls. Well, that's not a very good reference. They're not helping you at all. So even if they're really have a great job and a lot of skills and everything, don't put them on your resume unless they're going to respond and respond positively. And if your current supervisor is listed, make sure they are not surprised if they get a reference check. That's very awkward. Calling, and this has happened to me, I've called up, checking a reference to a current supervisor, and the supervisor, what? They've applied for a job? I don't know what to say. And that's really awkward to start out your conversation. So please make sure if you include your supervisor in your resume that they're aware you're applying for jobs. And another tactic to consider, maybe you just have on your resume, supervisor available upon request, or I've seen this before, this is my supervisor, please contact me first before you contact the supervisor. That's a very common tactic for that. So the supervisor is not surprised when they get a reference check. Very, very important. So, that concludes my information about hiring, applying for federal jobs. We've talked about USA Jobs is the key. That's where you start. You set up your account, login.gov. We talked about the process. Why is it so complicated? Because of, a president got killed one time. And also, It's the intent to make federal hiring fair and not political. That's why it's so complicated. So it prioritizes the process over the outcome sometimes, and it takes a lot of time. We've talked about what's on what you should include on your resume. Use those action verbs. Look at the job announcement to help refine your resume if you're applying for a certain job. Be ready to answer that assessment questionnaire. Be your advocate. Don't be modest, but be honest. We also talked about being prepared for a USA Hire assessment test if the job requires it, and giving yourself enough time to complete it. We also talked about some interview tips and reference tips. And here are some jobs that we are announcing at Hawaii Volcanoes National Park in the next month or two. Opening this fall, Forestry Technician. It's a wildland firefighter. Exciting job. Has anyone ever fought fires before? Yeah, it's a lot of hard work, but it's a great team. We have a fantastic wildland firefighting team here, and they are about building your skills and a lot of opportunities to travel. There's a budget analyst that's opening. That's a permanent job. The recreation fee clerk. That's a great entry-level position, permanent. You can get your foot in the door, get your status as a permanent federal employee, and then move up. That's what's expected for these positions, too. Park guide is a student position. We're hiring 2. A park ranger interpretation, we're hiring 2. As well as Hawaiian language requirement, we're hiring 1. And a visual information specialist, which means working in digital platforms, creating graphic design, videos, those kind of products, social media, website. That's a visual information specialist that we're working on, or recruiting. So please be on the lookout. And there are many more jobs coming. We hire, I'm not sure how much we hire a year, but we probably hire at least 30 to 50 jobs a year. Most of them temporary, but a great way to get experience working for the federal government, even if it's not a permanent job. Get your name out there, and also the more you apply, usually the better you get in becoming more competitive in this very complicated process. So I'll open it up to questions, but thanks so much. I do have a handout, if you didn't get one, that kind of puts down the main points of this presentation available here. So thank you so much for coming, and I'll open up for questions if you have any. Yes, sir.
Does the position of park ranger require a certification of some kind of degree?
Question is, does the park ranger require a certification or degree? Well, it depends. For entry level, which is what we're hiring GS5, to be eligible for a GS5 position, you have to have either a college degree, a 4-year college degree, or equivalent work experience. So 4 years of work experience that's related to park rangering. In this case, interpretation. The interpretive park ranger provides visitor services, formal ranger talks, roving in the park, seeking to assist visitors connect to the meanings of the resource in the park. And they're serving visitors, helping them with minor first aid, helping park cars, helping with eruption, but mostly it's serving visitors and based out of this building for the interpretive park ranger. There's also law enforcement park rangers, and their job is very different, and they have a lot of different certifications. They're required to have a commission.
So it's a pretty broad.
Yeah. Yes, it's pretty broad. And then if you go up the skill set to like a GS7, then it's more than a 4-year degree. You can have a graduate degree and qualify for 7, or equivalent work experience, so it's like 6 years of work to qualify for that GS7 or related degrees. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Other questions? Anyone have any other questions? Yes, sir.
How would you recommend describing the word gap? I'll use myself as an example. I semi-retired in 2019 and I'm bored. I need to be 40 hours again. So how does one go about his interest rate? Why do that?
It's a great question. How do you describe gaps in your work history? And I would recommend trying to be honest about it and open. And not everyone's career is just like a walking uphill. Sometimes you want to stop and smell the roses, or you have other opportunities that present themselves. I interviewed someone who had a work gap, and it was because their mom was dying, and they left their job to care for their mother in hospice, and that's the reason. It's totally understandable. But again, if they had not mentioned that, then I would don't just. What I would advise, in addition to being honest, is don't let the hiring manager write our own narrative, because that's it's a human trait. Is without information we kind of write our story. Give us the opportunity to understand what's going on with you, and I think it's more and more common is to have those gaps, especially with COVID. A lot of gaps in the 2020. Any other questions out there?
Yeah, what's the age limit?
Question about age limit. There is none. There's no age limit. We had Sorkin. Oh, shoot, I've heard she was over 100 years old, park ranger, working at Rosie the River. She was a Rosie the Riveter in World War II and retired, I believe, last year, over 100 years old as a park ranger. So there is age requirement for wildland firefighter and for law enforcement. And the age cap for those is, actually it's 37, because you have only 20 years to work. And then you have mandatory retirement at 57 for those that require a lot of physical activity as a core component of that job. But working as a budget analyst, working as a feed technician or a park ranger, there is no age mandatory minimum or maximum. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So, like I work shift work, and so whenever I'm at work, I work 12-hour days for how I'm going there. So like, when I write in how many hours per week, would I be putting 84 hours a week?
The question is working shift work, and you work sometimes more than 40 hours a week. Is that all the time?
Yeah, like I work 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off, or a couple months on, a couple months off, whatever. But like when I'm at work, I work 12 hours a day.
That's a really good question. I would probably put your average per week. If you average that out, is that 40 hours a week over the course of a year?
Yeah.
Or if it's more, it's more. Great. Now that might not give you more bonus points for the HR specialist, but that's the truth, and it's important to put. If you're working 60, 80 hours a week, put that on your resume and have that appear, and give yourself credit for all that extra experience beyond the 40 standard hours per week. But that's a difficult question. I would probably talk to an HR specialist for sure, because that's something I have not encountered before with the shift work. Philip?
Does experience in other government roles give you any credit towards an unrelated job in the government?
The question is experience with other government agencies?
Any role,
anything. Any role? Yes, yeah. So, in a couple ways. One is HR specialists love to see, it says it's easier for an HR specialist when they see federal government employment, because they know what that is, right? So when they see that on their resume, they're not like, I don't know what this job working for this company I've never heard of, I'm not sure what that is. It's harder. So if it's easier, when there's a round hole and you put a round peg in it, it's a little more intuitive for the HR specialists when they see positions in the government they're familiar with. But also, more work for the federal government has implications for retirement. Reaching that retirement age, it's all creditable, even if it was just you worked a few years here, then you worked some years then have a gap, you worked in the private sector for 10 years and you came back and worked for a different agency, there are some advantages to having previous federal service. Does that make sense?
Does that include military service as well?
Yeah, so also military service is credible federal service. And we have required by law that we have to provide additional advantages for veterans when they're applying for federal jobs. It's usually measured in their DD-214, what type of service they had, how many years of service, if they, there's disability associated with their military service, and all that, is important. Okay. One last question? Well, I want to again thank you for coming. I have a handout that you may need to go this way. I'll put up a barricade here. I'd be happy to hand them out to you if you didn't already get one. And yeah, thank you for coming. Please, best of luck on those applications. And I hope to see you maybe as a coworker in the future. Mahalo.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Have a good night. Thanks. Thank you. Have a good night.
Falls Creek, Fall Creek? Yeah, you've been there? Fall Creek Falls? Well, that's where I family with that, so.
That's so cool. Yeah.
I grew up in Cookville.
All right, guys. There we have it. Thanks for joining us. We're still here. Hawai'i Chapter. I haven't talked for an hour. My voice is hoarse. Can you hear us? Thanks for hanging out with us. Hope you all got something out of the show tonight. A lot of good information. Yeah. If you live here, come and apply for a job because it doesn't sound like it's that complicated. I mean, a resume is a resume and an interview is an interview, right? You guys obviously love this volcano, love this park.
There are two new skyscrapers.
Yeah, it don't matter whether you sit at the front desk. It sounds like it was like a gate job, right? A computer job, a firefighting job. That's just right now. That's right now. He says more is coming. So check it out. We're gonna leave this up on our stream. Hawai'i Chapter's gonna leave it up, right? You guys are leaving that up? I think, yeah. Right? Once we hit in. Other than that, have a great night. Thanks for joining us. Aloha.
Nice to meet you, Ryan.